Hello and welcome to your final project of Sewing Essentials 1. This is the Ultimate Library Bag and we're going to be making this today. For the Ultimate Library Bag, we'll be using a canvas for the exterior, quilting cotton for the inside. We're going to get thread, one that matches the inside, one that matches the outside, a metal zipper for your outside pocket, an accent button, and this is all the hardware we're using. We have a slider, a rectangle ring, I've got this little metal label, magnetic snap. We're gonna need a hand sewing needle for sewing that button on later. I have 1.5 meters of 1-inch webbing, and that's all the supplies that are going into the bag. And then here's all the tools I've got out that I may be using for this. And we got the instructions as well. And flip to the last page of your instructions, and we can cut out, this is the pattern piece that's going to be the snap flap on the front of the bag. So we'll cut that out right on the line. And we're also gonna cut out these labels. So divide up your project piece labels. Anything that says lining we'll put off to the side because we're cutting those with the lining fabric. And all these pieces, including the snap flap, we're gonna be cutting out with the exterior fabric. So first what I'm gonna do is iron this fabric so I don't have any creases in it and get all ready to cut. So you're always gonna have one crease in the middle of your fabric where it was folded on the bolt of fabric. And the only way to really get rid of that is to get it wet. So if you have a spray on your iron or if you wash it, this is the order that we're gonna start cutting out our fabric, starting with the front and back of the bag from the exterior fabric. So we need 15 inches wide by 18 inches tall. Now if you're not sure the difference between the width and the height of the fabric, the width's gonna run from selvage to selvage. So this is one end and it's gonna be wide this way. So I have my fabric folded in half because we need 2 of these. So I have a really big selvage here. My seam allowance is gonna be at least 3/8 of an inch. So if I have a little bit of this white left on, that's okay. It's gonna be hidden. So again, I'm gonna start by giving myself a straight line to start with, cutting right on the 0 line on the right side. And because we need 15 inches across, I'm moving over to the 15. So this is my extra fabric for the other pieces. I'm gonna put it aside. Now I need to make this 18 inches tall. That's done, so I'm gonna pin this on here. Or clip it on, so that way I'll be able to keep track of it. So next we're gonna do the lower pocket and the upper pocket. So they're both 11 inches wide. So I'm gonna cut one piece that's 11 inches wide, and then I'm gonna cut the 10-inch and the 2-inch off of that piece. I already have a straight line from my last cut. So the first one is 10 inches, going up to 10. And then the next one is 2 inches, so we're gonna go up 2 inches. So that's the lower pocket, the upper pocket. Next we need 6 inches by 2 inches. I'm just gonna cut the 2-inch piece from one of my scraps. It says it should be 6 inches wide by 2 inches tall, but it doesn't matter if you swap 2 inches wide for 6 inches tall. It's not going to make any difference on your fabric. It's such a tiny little piece that shows. And my last 2 pieces are the snap flap. So I'm going to be using this pattern piece. I'm just going to fold my fabric in half, and it just fits. If you have a design in your fabric and you're trying to set it up so that you have a certain part of the design showing, then this part here is not going to show in the final product, but this is where you'd want to showcase your design, in the lower section here. I'm just going to use a pin to mark that snap placement right here. Stuck a pin through that dot. I can flip it over and make a mark in the fabric where the snap's going to go. Here's the last two things to cut out. We'll need two of this one, the front and back, the lining of the bag, and then one for the inside pocket, 9 inches by 18 inches tall. So the first thing I'm going to do is just quickly iron the fabric. So we're going to cut out 15 wide, 17 tall for the front and back, and we're going to cut that from these two pieces closest to the selvage. And then out of this section, we'll be able to get the pocket. Last piece to cut is the inside pocket. So I've got this piece that was on the fold. I'm going to open it up. First thing we're going to do is sew the interior pocket. So I'm going to take this label off, and we need to fold this piece in half with the right sides together, so that it turns into a square-ish shape. We'll line up those edges. So now that I've done this top edge here with this fold is the top edge. And we're just gonna pin these edges together. We'll be starting up at this corner, sew down, turn the corner, and sew up to about here. Then we're going to leave a space for turning, start sewing again here, and sew up like this. So basically we're sewing two L shapes, one here, one here. So we're starting to sew up where the fold is. And we need to make sure that we sew right up to that edge. We're going to use a 3/8 seam allowance. Now we're going to cut the corners, and you just want to cut off the excess fabric. You can get really close to the stitching, but don't cut the stitching. If you do cut the stitching, then you'll just have to sew it again a little bit further in. When you cut a corner up here by a fold, just be very careful that you don't get, if your stitching didn't go all the way up to the fold, then it's very easy to make a hole in that. So just make sure you give it a little bit of space. The reason we're cutting the corners is so that it's not so bulky once it's turned right side out. So now that we've done that, we can turn it right side out. It's not a very big opening in the bottom, but I find the easiest way to do that is to, from the outside, poke one corner down. I'm going to use this to poke out my corners. I can use the rounded edge to run along the seams to push those seams out, and that's going to make it easier when I press this so that those seams are pushed out to the edge. There, now we'll go iron the whole thing flat. In the bottom, make sure that those two raw edges are tucked inside. You almost want to make that invisible so that you can't tell that there was an opening there. Now we need to take one of these two lining pieces. Whichever one you choose is going to be the back of the bag. So this is going to be the back of the lining. I'm going to put the front aside for a second. And now we're going to place the inside pocket on top of this. So where the fold is going to be the top of the pocket. So if you have a directional fabric, make sure that this is the top. If you flip it over, the design will flip either upside down or right side up. And make sure that your bag is oriented this way. So the tallest way is up and down, and this is the wide way. We want the pocket to be about 3 inches down from the top edge and centered from side to side. And then we'll pin it in place. You can double check that the fold, the opening in your pocket is at the bottom, and then when you sew the pocket on, that's going to close up the hole. So we'll be top stitching the pocket onto the bag very close to the edge of the pocket, starting up here. We'll go down, turn the corner, go across, and turn the other corner and come all the way back up here. So I know this looks extremely close to the edge, and it feels like you're gonna fall off the edge, and it feels difficult to do, but I promise that it's not as bad as it looks, and it looks a lot better than sewing in. If you can keep your stitching really close to the edge, it looks more professional. Occasionally you'll find that when you turn a corner, when you're top stitching a pocket like this, because the corner is a little bit thicker, that the sewing machine's gonna get a bit stuck and it won't wanna go. So you can anticipate that and put your hand behind and just give that fabric a little extra help. Give it a little pull, and it shouldn't get stuck. So now we're gonna do something that looks hard but is super impressive and not that bad to do. And that is doing a second row of top stitching 1/4 inch away from your first row. So what I'm gonna do is line up my first row of stitching with this line in my presser foot. It's at the 1/4 inch mark, and I just put that presser foot down like that. And you can see this line right here, and I'm gonna be watching my stitching and watching that line in the foot. I'm just gonna keep staring at that while I sew, and I'm gonna keep those lined up. And because this is the lining of the bag, it's not gonna be something that shows a lot. So if you give it a try with this, then you'll know if you wanna do it on the outside of your bag. So this is now the lining back, and here's our pocket. Fully lined pocket. And we're gonna put the lining front, right side together with the lining back, and we're gonna pin them together on the 2 sides and the bottom. We also need to leave an opening in the bottom, let's say like 4 to 5 inches wide. And this is a nice way of marking a spot by putting 2 pins close together to remind you that that's gonna be your stopping point. So one thing I really like to do when I'm doing a bag lining is to make the seam allowance gradually bigger towards the bottom of the bag, so that when it's stuffed inside the bag, because that makes it slightly smaller than the exterior of the bag, which means that it fits perfectly inside without being wrinkled and baggy. Because if you make them exactly the same size, the lining, because it's going inside, will have to bunch up just a little bit. So our seam allowance is going to be 1/2 inch. So starting at the top, because the lining has to match up with the exterior, that means that we have to have that 1/2 inch seam allowance at the top. So I'm just gonna make a little mark to remind myself. At the top of the bag, we'll be sewing a 1/2 inch seam allowance. As we get towards the center of the bag, I wanna be at a 5/8 seam allowance, which is just 1/8 of an inch bigger than the 1/2 inch. I'm gonna press those seams open. The easiest way to do that is to pull your bag over the ironing board if it will fit, as much as you can. You can at least do the sides. And at the bottom, I'm just gonna fold it up like this. Now we're gonna make 4-inch box corners. To set this up, you wanna take the front and the back of the bag, pull that apart, and line up those side seams. You can give that a little shake. And you can watch those triangles form. So you want to have it looking kind of like this. So you have like this diamond shape here. And these are the 2 corners that we're going to be sewing across. And again, we're doing 4-inch box corners. We're going to trim that down to be a 1/4-inch seam allowance. And the bag lining is finished, so we'll set that aside. Now we need to grab the zipper binding, and we're going to fold it in half the long way and iron this. You want to get a good crease. Then you open it up and fold each long edge in towards that first crease. You don't want it to go all the way to the middle because you want it to leave a little bit of room for folding. And then fold that middle crease one more time, and you have your binding. Now we need to cut this piece in half. So just fold it. Now we need the zipper. And we're gonna trim the ends of the zipper so that we have just enough zipper to wrap the binding over. See how when I wrap the binding over, there's a bunch of extra here? So I want to cut some of this off so that when I wrap this over the edge, it just comes up to that metal bit right there. So I'm going to stick that in here, and we're going to be sewing across here to hold this in place. And we need to do the same thing on this end. Now this is where a glue stick comes in super handy. I really love this thing. I'm going to put some glue here. You can use pins as well, but the glue is awesome. Because I want to bring those 2 edges together like that. We need the zipper open just a bit for this to work. And the zipper binding's a little bit wider. That's fine. We're just sewing where the zipper is. And I'm going to do the same thing over here. So we'll be switching to the zipper foot so that we'll be able to get nice and close to this fold without this big metal bit interfering. So I'm going to take that off. We'll be putting it on the left bar. Oh yeah, and I want to switch over to my thread that matches the exterior, so I'm going to quickly do that. So we're just sewing close to the fold, the 2 folds that are wrapped around the zipper. Now we can cut the ends of the zipper binding off. We just want it to be flush with the sides of the zipper like that. So we're going to grab the lower pocket. Remember, it's 11 wide and 10 tall. So this might be a bit confusing because the zipper is the same size as the height of it. But we actually want to sew the zipper on to this side. So you want a little bit extra on your pocket. So make sure it's wider than your zipper. And we're gonna fold the zipper right side down against the top edge of the pocket. So if you have a direction on your fabric, make sure that this is the top of the design. And we're just gonna pin in place along the zipper. So when we start to sew along this edge, we're gonna have to yank the zipper pull out of the way before we start that because it's in the way immediately. So I'm gonna pull this back this way. We'll start sewing, we'll sew up to about halfway, then we'll stop, put the needle down, move the zipper pull, and then carry on the rest of the way. So we're gonna be sewing right up where the zipper binding is. And again, try not to start sewing right at the edge because it's fairly thick. So you wanna start in just a bit. And we're aiming to sew through the center of these zippers, of the zipper tape here, so that if we're sewing right around here where this pin is, that's perfect. So it's about 1/4 inch. And don't let it get stuck. Give it a little shove so that it doesn't get stuck. Okay, so here's where we're gonna stop. I'm gonna make sure the needle goes down. Anytime you want to lift your presser foot, make sure your needle is down so that you don't lose your spot in your seam. Now I'm going to pull the zipper pull out of the way. This one is very big, so you might need to lift your presser foot higher to get it pushed past, or have a friend come and pull that up for you. Now we're going to flip the zipper up. So we're starting to see that come together. And we're gonna take the upper pocket piece and we'll fold this down on top of the zipper. But because we wanna be sewing with the zipper on top, we'll flip it over. So the other way to do that would be to have your upper pocket piece right side up and then place the zipper on top of that like this. So again, make sure it's centered so you have a little bit of fabric on either side. Before you sew this, double check to make sure you're putting this together correctly, because it's an awkward thing to try to figure out. So if you fold this back and flip it up, this is what you want to be looking at. You want to see your zipper in between the two pieces of fabric like that. So we're getting close to this big zipper pull again. I'm going to put the needle down and get that zipper pull out of the way. Lift the presser foot. Now we'll flip this over, close the zipper, and we're going to press the fabric away from the zipper. Now, because it's a metal zipper, you gotta be careful because it gets really hot when it's ironed. I'm gonna take my zipper foot back off and put on the regular one. And I'm gonna increase my stitch length to 3 for this top stitch. Now I wanna sew along this edge right here. So I'll be sewing through the top layer of exterior fabric as well as through this little piece of zipper in the back, and that's going to help hold it open and keep the fabric from getting caught in the zipper. I'm going to line up the edge of the foot with the teeth, and I want my stitching to be a little bit closer to the zipper, so I'm going to move my needle over. And you do that by adjusting your width dial. So we're still staying on a straight stitch, but we're going to move the needle over. On my machine, wherever it shows like a zigzag, that's showing the width. And if I move this button, you can see my needle's moving to the side. So I just moved it over a little bit to the left. Oh, I'm gonna go a little bit more. I think that's good. Again, we're gonna get the zipper pull out of the way. I'm going to turn the pocket around and so do the same thing on the other side of the zipper. We're going to flip the pocket over and we're gonna fold in all 4 sides. And the edge of the zipper is the guide for how much you're gonna fold over. It should be about 1/4 inch. This is my smallest piece right here, so I'm gonna start with that, folding a little bit and pressing it in. We just need to do a single fold. Now we'll fold a small amount down from the top and on the bottom. If you want to make your folded corners really nice, you can open those folds up, and you see where those 2 folds make an X in the middle. So we're going to fold that meeting point over like that, and then refold those 2 spots, and you get a mitered corner. And that way you don't have anything sticking out of your pocket from the good side. So we have all 4 edges folded in, and we're going to place this on the front of the bag and stitch it down. If you find your pieces are folding out a lot, you can use a little bit of glue to hold that in, or a piece of Wonder Tape, especially if it's just a small amount of fabric that you have to fold. You can even fold a super small amount if you have the glue and the Wonder Tape. And now we're going to grab the front of the bag, place the pocket on here. You want your pocket to be placed 3.5 inches down from the top edge and centered from side to side. And then pin it down. I'm going to start sewing around the zipper because I find that it hides my back stitch better, because we're going to be sewing all the way around anyway, so it doesn't really matter where you start, but I just find that this is a good spot. And again, we want to be really close to the edge, about 1/8 of an inch from the edge. And I'm going to go for a second row of stitching on this as well. Even though you can't see the stitches very well, you can still get the feeling that they're there. Now we're going to find the spot where the snap is going to go. It's going to sit just above the pocket in the middle of the bag. So I'm going to fold the bag in half to find the center. So the 2 sides are touching like this. And I'm going to mark a spot about 1/2 inch above the pocket. You can do this on the right or the wrong side of the bag. It doesn't really make a difference. So there's my spot. Here's our snap pieces. I want to put the thicker end on the bag itself, and the thinner piece is going to go on the snap flap. So I'm going to put those aside. I'm going to put this washer right here and mark those 2 lines. Now we need to cut those 2 lines. You can use scissors, just pinch it and snip. Another way of doing it is to use a seam ripper, and you can put the seam ripper in at the beginning and push it out at the end, and then just carefully cut using the cutter at the bottom of the seam ripper. Before you do that, just check this with a scrap of your exterior fabric, because some fabrics, especially ones with a more loose weave, will pull threads when you use this, but I know that it works okay with the fabric that I have. So I have this little scrap piece of Peltex. It's a heavyweight stabilizer, and I'm gonna use it to just reinforce where the snap goes. So I'm just gonna cut a little square piece off, and I need to cut those same lines on the Peltex. So from the right side of the bag, place those two little legs from the snap into the holes. Can't find them. There they are. And we'll flip it over to the wrong side. Next, we'll place the Peltex on top of that. And then the little washer. And then we'll just push those legs out to the side until they're flat. Now we need to do the same thing with the other half of the snap, and it's going to go on one of the snap flap pieces. So I've already marked that from the beginning. That's my center. Now we're going to take the two pieces of the snap flap and put them right sides together. Match up all the sides. And we're going to be sewing the two sides and the bottom. We're going to leave this top edge open. I'm going to use a 3/8 seam allowance, which is about the same as lining up my fabric with the edge of the presser foot. Now we're going to trim the corners and turn it right side out. Poke out the corners and push those seams out to the edge. So we're going to top stitch around here, and we'll try to stay pretty close to the edge because we have a snap kind of in the way. So there's not a lot of room here for a big seam allowance. So I'm going to stay sort of close to the edge, and again I'm going to switch over to the number 3 stitch length. Sometimes the magnet can stick to the metal plate on your machine, so you might have to just give it a little push so it doesn't get stuck right there. So now we need the bag back. That's the piece that doesn't have the pocket on it. We're going to fold this in half the long way, so match up the two sides. And now what we need to do is mark the center of the top. So right up here, you could use a marker as well, but I'm just gonna take a tiny little snip out of the fabric. That way I can see the center easily from both the front and the back. And now I'm gonna mark the center of this top edge as well of the snap flap. So I'm gonna fold this in half. And now I have that top edge, that center marked. So I'm gonna place the snap flap right side down against the right side of the back. That means that the snap is going to be facing up, and I'm going to match up those two center marks like this. Stick those like that and just clip them together. And we're going to sew this down. We're going to sew this with a 1/4 inch seam allowance. Now we're going to put the front and back together. So the front is the one with the pocket, back is the one with the flap attached. And we'll put those together, tops together, right sides together. So we're going to sew the two sides in the bottom, and we're doing a 1/2 inch seam allowance. We're going to press these seams open, just like with the lining. So as a reminder to do the box corners, pull the front and back of the bag away from each other, line up the side seams, give it a little shake, and you'll see those triangles form right before your very eyes. Now, I'm gonna do this, and we want a 4-inch corner. So we're gonna cut off the excess right here. Now we can turn it right side out. So you can take your label, and we're gonna figure out where we want to put this. So you can do it could go above the pocket. I've put them before just through the top layer of the pocket here, and you can put it in the pocket right here, anywhere you want, really. Once you've decided where you want your label to go, then you're gonna take the backing and mark the 2 lines that you need. So just make sure which 2 lines you're gonna be using. So on this one, it's the second from the edge, and you might need to move those legs back and forth to figure out where they fit. So I'm gonna place this here, make sure it looks straight, and I need to cut those 2 lines. I think I'm gonna just make this go right through both layers, through the pocket and through the bag itself, rather than have it into the pocket. And I need to mark those lines on this little piece as well. I'm gonna just bring this inside out. And for these ones, I usually push them towards the middle. If you find this piece is too big, you can just trim it down a little bit. So now we're gonna grab the webbing and cut a 5-inch piece off of one end. We're gonna take the rectangle ring and slide it on there, fold it in half, and we're just gonna sew across the bottom to hold it in place. Now we're gonna attach the side strap onto the side seam. It doesn't matter which side seam you pick, just line up the cut edge with the cut edge of the bag like this, and you'll have your rectangle ring hanging down. There's the side seam. Now we're gonna move over to the other side seam. So there's my other side seam, and the rest of the webbing, I'm gonna take one end and lay that down like this and stitch it in place. So now we're gonna turn the exterior inside out again. Shove the strap down in there. And we're gonna take the lining, the bag lining, and turn it right side out. We're gonna slide the inside of the bag into the exterior, and we wanna make sure that the back of the bag, which has the flap, is lined up with the back of the lining, which has the pocket. So we're gonna flip that like this and slide that in here. I'll start by matching up my side seams. Just make sure that the straps are still pointing down when you're doing this. It's okay to stretch the bag a bit to make them fit, but if you find either the lining or the bag exterior are very different sizes, you may have to stitch your lining a little bit closer, make it a little bit smaller, or take some stitches out and make it a little bit bigger. But I think I can stretch this to make it fit all right. And I'm ready to sew. We're going to be sewing with a 1/2 inch seam allowance, and we're going to backstitch when we go over the side seams just to secure the straps really well. When you're doing this, you just keep rolling the bag towards you. now we can pull the whole thing out through the bottom of the bag. And before we even do anything else, we're gonna just sew up this bottom seam. It's already pressed, so we're just gonna sew across. And if you want, you can change back to your lining thread color so that it doesn't show. Now we're going to tuck the lining inside the exterior. And because the lining is a little bit shorter than the exterior, we're going to end up with an extra edge of exterior folded in. So I want you to push the lining all the way down to the bottom. And when you do that, you should have an edge like this. So we're going to press around this whole edge. So we have that top edge beautifully pressed. Now we're going to top stitch around the whole thing. We're going to be sort of stitching right in this seam, which could be called stitching in the ditch. And again, I'm going to lengthen my stitch. When you come to the strap, have the strap pointing up and just sew right over top of it. So you can see how where the straps are, that you've got this little flip. And we're going to sew across the top here so that it is secured to it. We're going to do the same thing on the flap, on the snap flap. And the last one on the long strap. Now we're going to put the slide on your strap, which will make it an adjustable bag strap. So you got to keep in mind what is the outside of the strap so that you don't get it twisted. So if you can lay it like this, follow to the end. So now you know this is the outside of the strap right here, and we're going to put this up and down over that center bar of the slide. We'll pull that towards the middle. And now we're going to slide the strap in to the rectangle ring that's sticking out right here from the outside in. So now we have that coming up like this. We need to give ourselves some space to work with here. I'm going to pull this up so that we have some room in the middle. And now I'm going to slide the end of the strap up through one side here, turn around and come right back down. So now we have 2 rows of strap going through the slide, the top one and the lower one. So those 2 lower ones are going to join together, and that way your strap will be adjustable. So see how this still moves? If you're not sure, try pinning this first and then check to make sure your strap's still adjustable. Fold the end underneath and join these like this. And it seems really thick, but your machine should be able to handle it. I highly recommend having a thread that matches so that it will hide. Now we're going to sew the button onto the flap, which is the last step. So I've got a hand sewing needle. I've just gotten a length of thread from my sewing machine, and I'm going to double that and tie a knot. I'm going to position the button just above the snap. So I'm going to start by inserting my thread just above the snap. So my knot is at the back. Pull that tight. And I'm just going to keep going in and out for several stitches so that it's secure. If you have a thicker thread, such as a top stitching thread or a craft thread, this works really well, and it doesn't take as many times going in and out. It's a little bit stronger. And now I'm going to tie a knot on the back. I'm just going to grab a little bit of the stitch, pull it all the way, almost all the way through, and then I'm going to just sneak my needle in through that loop a couple of times to secure a knot. And I'll do that a couple more times.
Wow.